You ever look at a world map and just kind of accept the lines you see? The borders between countries, they feel so permanent, right? So official. But what if I told you that map is just a snapshot in time? A single frame in a very long and often very violent movie. Well, today, we're going to explore the powerful forces that have drawn and redrawn the world we all know. So let me just ask you straight up, are these lines really permanent? I mean, think about the map your grandparents grew up with, or even their grandparents. The names, the shapes, heck, the very existence of some countries would be totally different. The thing we have to remember is that the maps we use aren't a natural feature of the Earth, like a mountain or a river. No, they were drawn and redrawn with ink, and way too often with blood. They're the living record of these huge historical forces, of wars that shattered continents, revolutions that birthed new ideas, and empires that just crumbled into dust. And there is probably no better place to see this in action than in 20th century Europe. You had 2 world wars in just over 30 years. It was like a massive geological event, completely reshaping the political landscape of the entire continent. Just think about that for a second. 2 moments, barely a generation apart, completely remade the continent. In 1919, you had the Treaty of Versailles, which tried to build a new Europe from the wreckage of World War I. But, well, that peace didn't last. By 1945, after the even greater devastation of World War II, the world's leaders were right back at the drawing board, forced to draw the lines all over again. And the consequences were absolutely seismic. Empires that had been around for centuries, the Austro-Hungarian, the Ottoman, the Russian, they just vanished from the map. Poof! In their place, a new idea was taking hold, the nation-state. Places like Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, and a reborn Poland were carved out, all in an attempt to give distinct ethnic and cultural groups their own country. This wasn't just changing a few borders, it was a fundamental shift in how Europe even defined itself. But the map-making didn't stop there. World War II brought changes that were arguably even more dramatic. Poland, for instance, was literally picked up and moved westward on the map. And Germany, the epicenter of the whole conflict, was carved into 2 separate countries, a capitalist West and a communist East, which of course set the stage for the Cold War. But this whole process of map-making wasn't just happening in Europe. As the old colonial empires started to crumble after World War II, new nations were fighting for their own lines on the map. And perhaps nowhere was this more dramatic or more tragic than on the Indian subcontinent. So in 1947, the British Parliament passes the Indian Independence Act. This one law ended nearly 2 centuries of British rule. And in the same breath, it drew a brand new border right through the heart of the subcontinent, creating 2 nations, India and Pakistan. On top of that, it set off a chaotic scramble as hundreds of smaller princely states had to decide which new country they were going to join. The result was not a peaceful transition. It was a human catastrophe. As millions of Hindus and Sikhs fled to India and millions of Muslims fled to Pakistan, communal violence just erupted on an unimaginable scale. Conservative estimates put the death toll at over 1 million people. One account from the time really captured the horror, describing the transition as violent, with blood-curdling massacres all over the country. You see, these weren't just lines on a map. It was a traumatic event that tore families and communities apart, and its legacy absolutely echoes to this very day. But the story of map-making in India didn't even end with that external border. Once the new nation was established, an equally complex and honestly fascinating process began. Redrawing the map from within. The central idea was something called linguistic reorganization. Now, even before independence, this was a major goal. The British had drawn boundaries just for their own administrative convenience. The new goal was to redraw them based on language, which for millions of people was the primary marker of their cultural identity. So why does this matter? Well, the idea was to create a more democratic and functional state. Just imagine trying to get an official document or go to school or show up in court when all the proceedings are in a language you don't even speak. The goal was to align the administrative boundaries with how people actually lived and communicated. Let's take the case of Punjab as an example. For years, activists campaigned for what they called a Punjabi Suba, a state for Punjabi speakers. Initially, the government said no, fearing it would just cause more division. But the movement didn't give up. After years of agitation, the government finally passed the Punjab Reorganization Act in 1966. And this act carved the old state in 2, creating the new states of Punjab and Haryana, each with its own dominant language and cultural identity. So, after looking at the battlefields of Europe and the political movements in India, what's the big takeaway? It becomes crystal clear that the lines on our maps are anything but random. They are the scars and the signatures of history.
So what we've seen is that it doesn't matter if they're drawn by a general's sword or a politician's pen. These borders are intensely human creations. They're the physical evidence of our history, our politics, and our culture, etched right onto the surface of the earth. And they have very real-world consequences. These lines determine our citizenship. They influence our sense of who we are, and they are often at the very heart of the international conflicts that continue to shape our world. They are the silent legacy of the past, actively shaping our present.
Which leaves us with the final thought. We've seen how war, decolonization, and identity movements have drawn the maps we live with today. But here's the thing. History hasn't stopped. So it really makes you wonder, what forces are at work right now, and who will be the ones to draw the maps of tomorrow?